Photosynthesis is taking in carbon dioxide in the form of gas from the air. It's taking in water from the roots of the plant, or in the case of algae, right through the membrane, through the cell wall, plus light. And of course, light is the sunlight, but it's energy. This is the source of the energy for the process. Now this is going to yield in the end C6H12O6, that's sugar, plus oxygen gas. Now that's the overall reaction, but as you saw when we did cellular respiration, this is not one reaction. There's numerous reactions, 12, 13, 14, 16, 24 steps, many steps throughout the process of photosynthesis. It gets us from the reactants on this side of the reaction, the reactants, to the products. The point is to make sugar. In the case of the plant, the sugar is going to create its structure as well as be the source for food later. Remember, plants are autotrophs. Auto, like automatic, and trophs. They make their position in the energy pyramid. They're making their own energy. They didn't make their own food. Well, they don't make their own energy. They make their own food. And so, as they make their own food, they're called autotrophs. Where we, remember, are called heterotrophs. All animals, anything that's not a plant that doesn't do photosynthesis, is a heterotroph. There are some other examples of life that do something else called chemo. They're chemotrophs. They use chemical reactions other than the breakdown of sugar or the production of sugar to get their energy. So there are organisms at the bottom of the ocean near the deep sea vents that don't use light as its primary energy source. But everything else on the planet does. And so we're going to talk about the majority of the creatures on this planet. So if you look at a leaf close up, you see it has a very beautiful set of structures that are for transporting nutrients and water to the very ends of the tree's reach. And that's so that the living tissues that's there, because a plant is alive, those living tissues can receive their nutrients that the plant takes up through its roots, and of course the water that it brings up. Okay, so when you look at the leaf structure, we can see that that the leaf is actually very complicated. Where here you look and see how beautiful it is. Here you can see there is beauty inside as well. And it's fairly complicated. You see, leaves have veins, and they have bundle sheaths. The veins are created by these bundle sheath cells that surround the xylem and the phloem. This is not going to be on the test leaf structure directly, but it's important that you understand that a leaf is not just simply a thin piece of green paper that hangs off a tree. It actually has a lot of function, a lot of structures that do. That have a lot of implications, but how plants work. You have an epidermis, just like we have an epidermis. They have an epidermis, lower and upper, meaning the top side and the lower side of the leaf. You have spongy cells, the mesophyll cells. You have palisade mesophyll cells, and within these cells is where you're going to find chloroplasts. You have guard cells that literally guard the cell. Let's take a closer look at this part here, at the stoma and guard cells, because this has a lot to do with transport of water and also how cactuses are able to survive the desert versus plants that grow around here that wouldn't be able to survive the desert. Let's take a look at those guard cells and the stoma. So these guard cells, they sit on the inside leaf, part of the leaf, and you see they almost look like mouths. If you take a close look at them, they're kind of freaky. I would even say alien-like, but you need a microscope to actually look at them. But right here on the other side of the leaf, you'll find these cells that when it's really hot and there's gonna be a lot of loss of water, these cells are gonna close up. But in order for the leaf to get the carbon dioxide it needs and get rid of the excess oxygen that it doesn't need, it needs to be able to move the gases freely out of their system, just like we do. So where we have mouths and noses that breathe these oxygens out from our lungs, these gases out from our lungs, plants also have these openings, and actually they very much look like little mouths. And you'll see that when their conditions are right, all the gases are moving in and out, exchanging gases. You're also losing water, which is very important. And you'll see in the next section of this video, the gases leave, oxygen leaves, carbon dioxide comes into the leaf, and this is where it happens, in the leaf, in the openings inside leaves. With the cactus has very thick tissue, very thick leaves, but it also has these stoma that allow it to control how much when the gas exchange occurs, and it also controls how much water is lost. In the case of a cactus, these stoma, we call them stoma, close during the day, when the hottest parts of the day, so that it doesn't lose too much water. Where at night in the desert it gets pretty cool, the plant is able to open these up, exchange the gases, and then close up these holes again before the daylight comes the next day. Plants around in the northeast and temperate regions have less to worry about, but still on very hot days they might close these stoma and reduce the amount of water that they're losing. Okay, let's go on and look and see how water is transported. By the way, water does not come into the plant through these leaves. The water comes into the plant through its roots. Let's go ahead and take a look at how that happens. Okay, we'll talk more about osmotic pressure, but we know that almost all things move from high to low. And the way that things move from high to low, they don't need any extra energy to do so. Now, with a human blood, you have to transport the fluid through all the capillaries and veins and arteries, and so you need energy to do so. Often you're moving from larger arteries and veins where there's lower pressure to places where there's really tiny veins and arteries that are going to be higher pressure. So you need that energy to push. So you need a heart that actually is going to pump. A tree doesn't have a heart that pumps because it doesn't need one. What a tree does, and any plant really, is any terrestrial plant, has roots that go into the earth where the water moves from high concentration to low concentration into the roots. And then because of this pressure difference, where this pressure is higher than the pressure up at the leaves, you'll notice that they're both negative as far as the overall pressure of the plant, but you'll notice that this is 0.3, negative 0.3, where this is negative 100. And so don't worry about the units, and don't worry about the Greek symbol that represents the water pressure within the plant, the overall water pressure in the plant. But just know that if you notice that you'll go from a negative 0.3 all the way to negative 100, that moves the water and the fluid within it from the lower end all the way up to the top of the tree. Still, the water needs to be able to, it still needs to be able to move, to be able to stick to the sides of its container. It's what we call the xylem. The xylem cells, the xylem is the tissue of the tree that actually creates the blood, its vessels for carrying the liquid, the water and minerals and other nutrients that the plant needs. You'll notice that the water here adheres to the side of the xylem. We talked about adhesion versus cohesion, and the reason that this water adheres or sticks to the sides of the xylem is because of, you guessed it, hydrogen bonding. We keep saying hydrogen bonding is going to be one of those things that are just going to keep coming up over and over again in biology, and this is another example of hydrogen bonding really impacting the function of a biological system. The water is moving from the the soil as it adheres to the sides. It keeps being pumped up. Notice that these openings are almost a one-way valve, very much like those openings in your blood vessels. There are tissues in the phylum instead of xylem. There's a phylum as well that actually has a two-way opening, but the adhesion sticks to the side of the wall, allowing the water to be moved slowly from the roots all the way up to the very tips of the leaves. And remember that at the leaves, the tree or the plant is exchanging gases, so any evaporation of water is going to happen through the stoma that we looked at earlier. So as the stoma water leaves the leaves, new water comes up, because then you're creating what's known as a negative pressure, right? A high negative pressure, which is much lower than the negative pressure that's at the roots. So because you have that negative pressure, the water from the roots actually goes up and moves from the root area to the leaf area. But it's through transpiration, it's through the actual evaporation of water that the plant is able to get more water from the soil. That water is carrying nitrogen, minerals, other nutrients that the plant needs to function. But remember, the plant is making its own food. It is an autotroph still. Also remember, there's two types of water conducting cells, the xylem and the phylum. And the phylum, again, is a two-way system where the xylem is moving the directions, and the water is moving only in one direction. And really, that's pretty much summarizes how water is transported. Let's go ahead and look now at how all this comes together to allow the plant to make sugar. Remember, sugar is what the plant is made of. Remember the word cellulose, that polymer of sugar that is indigestible by us, but only digestible by very few or relatively few organisms on the planet. That's why we can build our houses with it. But also it's making this sugar so that it can get the energy through cellular respiration, because remember, even though it's producing oxygen, even though it's producing its own sugar, it's also going to use that oxygen, that sugar, to do cellular respiration. It's getting rid of that CO2 out the stoma, and it's also getting rid of some water, which then allows the water to move up the tree or the plant, and it's producing CO2. It's bringing the CO2 in, and oxygen is leaving, and that CO2 ultimately came from us as animals on the planet that do only cellular respiration. The next video will cover how the molecular part of this cellular respiration and the similarity between mitochondria and chloroplasts and the processes that are involved.